Jennifer Turner is director of the Wilson Center's China Environment Forum. And Roger Mark D'Souza is director of Population, Environmental Security and Resilience for the Wilson Center. They join us to discuss sustainable fishing and ocean preservation. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And let's start there. If you give us the big picture overview about what the problem is it simply overfishing, or does it go broader than that? Jennifer, we'll be gentlemen and we'll let you go first.
Well, I mean, the basic problem is, of course, you know, the seas are being overfished. That you have big countries like China, Korea, Japan, and the United States plays a role too. And they're just sending their fleets out, and the Chinese in particular, and we can go into more details in a moment,
yeah, I want to ask
are
you
often
about that.
fishing illegally. But fishing, it's big business. And it's, you know, I mean, the United States, you know, the United States, I mean, we consume a lot of the fish that's caught illegally around the world as well.
Yeah, yeah. What would you add to this this scene setting that we're trying to do here?
I agree entirely with Jennifer, and I would say part of what we have been looking at is are the dynamics at a local level. What are these local communities, these local fishing communities, and the degree to which they are affected and impacted by recent developments such as climate change impacts.
So it's not just the big fishers, it's,
right.
It's sort of the family farmer
yes,
as well.
And particularly when this is an important source of protein for them. So it really does have significant health impacts.
Yeah, Jennifer, you brought up the whole notion of these, what do they call it, distant water fishing that the Chinese?
Distant water fishing.
Which you're saying is essentially illegal fishing.
Well, no, it's not all illegal. I mean,
okay.
the U.S., we have distant fishing fleet. We have about 200 ships. The Chinese have a little over 2,000. And the challenge has been is that these fishing fleets, I mean, they used to fish along China's coast, but because of overfishing and also a lot of pollution, the water pollution that comes from the mainland in China, I mean, they've something between 30 and 50% of their fish stocks have crashed. So their fishing fleets go further afield, and increasingly in African waters, Western Africa, and they often violate the rules for coming too close to the coast. Because a lot of the countries, like Roger Mark, you look at these local communities, that in some of the poorer countries, they don't have the kind of coast guards that the U.S. or Japan has, and they can't really chase off these fishing boats. So you have the Chinese fishers coming in, scooping up the fish. Also, they use trawling methods quite often. In reef areas, the Chinese, a lot of Asians like to eat the live fish, and they will often use cyanide to shock the fish so they can catch them live, or they toss in dynamite. So the damage that's done to the reef and other fish just in the process of getting a few of the fish is quite large.
And what you mentioned, if they don't have a Coast Guard to chase them off, that's it. That's the enforcement. It's an honor system, and if you don't have someone there literally in boats.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, the Chinese do sign agreements, like in Western Africa they have agreements, but the European Parliament had a study a couple of years ago saying that the Chinese are catching like 12 times as many fish as they say they are doing. It's pretty scary.
Is China the unique outlier here, or do other countries involve themselves in this type of pirate fishing? I don't know how to characterize it.
I think that you see this in other countries and even among local communities themselves. And what we have seen with a lot of our partners in countries like Madagascar, like the Philippines, like in the Caribbean, is that they're working more and more with local communities so that they have a sense of the value of the broader ecosystem, so that they understand if they engage in the type of harmful practices that Jennifer has mentioned, that it has a long-term impact on the ecosystem that affect their livelihood opportunities. So communities are beginning to realize this themselves, and they themselves are developing local enforcement mechanisms that the communities support.
That's what I want to ask. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer. I'm sorry.
Well, what I would say but then in countries like in the South China Sea, like in Vietnam, Malaysia, and Philippines, that a lot of the Chinese fishers are coming in there not without support. I mean, there's larger fishing ships. They get government subsidies, and they're often seen. You know, the Chinese government. There's land grab, the island issues there, and so in many ways that the Philippine, the Vietnamese, and other fishers, that they can't compete with this industrial complex fishing that's starting to take place there.
I'm wondering, I've learned enough talking to both of you over the years about these issues that at some point the key is some agreement on what exactly the problem is before you can get to where we got to, say, with the Paris Climate Agreement, where there was a broader based agreement on what needs to be addressed. Are we there when it comes to oceans and fishing?
I don't think so. I mean, there are international agreements. I mean, besides the law of the sea, there's some smaller agreements that countries and even the Chinese have signed on to. But I think that there's often an issue, the lack of monitoring data. Different countries, different types of organizations collecting data on fish. Fish are also underwater, and they're hard to count and hard to find. And so the question of transparency and data is a really tough barrier for really understanding the scope of the problems.
Running with this comparison to the climate change dilemma, how much time do we have to address this before entire areas of the oceans become unfishable?
I couldn't say exactly in terms of a very specific timetable, but what we know is that the fishing industry is going further and further out, and they're being more invasive and more intensive. So there is increasing pressure. And I think what we see in international agreements, such as the climate agreement, is the need to engage various mechanisms to collect data that will allow us to have a better sense of what's happening now.
What are the best forums for this kind of dialogue to take place, this type of negotiation to take place? I mean, I'm overwhelmed just hearing you talk about it, the complexity of this issue. When you talk about, say, a dietary preference of eating live fish, you get into cultural preferences, historic customs. This is so complex. Are there places where people can hash this out, so to speak?
I mean, there are global fishery conferences, just similar to, almost parallels the climate agreement with similar kind of convention of parties. But I think that one of the biggest challenges is going to be, though, is that it's actually the consumers, right? I mean, China
changing consumption habits.
But it's also like asking the right questions. I mean, China's the biggest producer and processor of fish in the world. And over half of the fish that they catch and process are sent to developed countries. So maybe you shouldn't point fingers, but Friday night fish fries, the frozen fish at the grocery store and fast food restaurants, a lot of that is coming from China. But we as consumers don't necessarily ask the question, well, where's my fish coming from?
So where is the activity? Where will we see progress, if we will see progress?
Well, I think that there's some bright lights. I mean, you have some environmental groups like Environmental Defense Fund, NRDC, that they've created these kind of sustainable fish kind of tracking systems. But really exciting is that just coming up this month, there's the State Department is putting on their third Fish Hackathon, which I can barely say. Fish Hackathon.
There aren't two H's in there, so you
not
have to say that
H's.
quickly
Yes.
to get the pronunciation right. What is the Fish Hackathon?
Well, it's a gathering of hackers, technology people coming together with ocean experts to really kind of, over a course of a weekend, to brainstorm some of the solutions to the problems that the experts noted. We've talked about a few of them here. The big question of data and transparency. Others, like fishing equipment, just gets dropped in the ocean. Because sometimes when the Coast Guard comes, the boats will just drop their equipment and run, and that equipment that gets dropped, it can just wreak havoc on the ecosystem. So over the course of the weekend, across 27 countries, there's going to be all these groups that are going to be trying to figure out what are some kind of technology solutions that can be used not only by, I think, international organizations, but I think by community members.
So they can gather data and they can propose solutions to problems.
And I think
this gets at some of these small fisheries.
Yeah, and I think this is also a question of citizen science, as we have discussed previously. This is an opportunity for these communities to be part of that process and looking at the role of mobile technology. And I think this fits into a broader agenda. When we think of the International Sustainable Development Goals, there's a call for looking at how this relates to the food security goals, for example, and what this means at looking at the fishing industry, and how do we engage citizens in that process, in data collection, analysis, and decision making. So it's both community engagement, it's consumer awareness, but it's also feeding that information into the policy processes at different scales.
The U.S. government's involvement in this and promotion of the Fish Hackathon suggests their belief in its potential. Do you share that belief? Do you think this has significant potential to be part of the solution?
I mean, I think it's quite exciting because there are, I mean, in some of the meetings I've had over the years, there's a lot of small organizations, NGOs and groups and communities that look at the fish issue, and I think this kind of event is going to give them voice, and it's quite exciting to see.
Great. Well, I'm sorry, Roger.
No, I agree. I think it's really important in terms of helping communities and the industry recognizing to recognize the global impact, but also an ecosystem perspective on addressing these issues. And I think initiatives such as the Fish Hackathon help in that regard.
Well, I believe that the people gathering for the Fish Hackathon in D.C. will be watching this interview. So thank you for your contribution to that
Thanks
discussion.
for having us.
Thank you.